The dust kicked up around Patrick Ingram's boots as he stood beside two fresh graves on the hillside, overlooking his ranch, watching his daughters cling to each other like saplings in a storm, while he felt nothing but a cold hollowness where his heart should be. His wife Sarah had been gone 3 months now, taken by cholera that swept through Columbia, California in the summer of 1878, and he still could not find the words to tell 10-year-old Emma or 7-year-old Lucy that everything would be fine because he did not believe it himself. The ranch hands avoided looking at him directly these days, and he knew they whispered about how the boss had turned to stone, how his girls wandered the property like little ghosts, how the whole place felt like it was slowly dying along with the memory of Sarah's laughter. Patrick went through the motions each morning, rising before dawn to check the cattle, mending fences, breaking horses, all the work that kept a ranch running. But he moved like a man underwater, slow and disconnected. When Emma brought him his coffee on the porch, her small hands trembling as she tried to pour it just the way her mother had, he could only nod and take the cup without meeting her desperate eyes. When Lucy woke screaming from nightmares, he would stand in the doorway of her room, frozen, until Emma rushed past him to comfort her sister. He was failing them, he knew that much, but grief had wrapped around him like iron chains, and he could not break free. The neighboring ranchers' wives had tried to help at first, bringing casseroles and pies, offering to take the girls for afternoons, but Patrick's silence drove them away. He could not bear their pitying looks, could not stand the way they spoke in hushed tones as if death were catching. So he retreated further into himself, and his daughters retreated too, becoming quieter and smaller with each passing week. The house that had once rung with music and stories now sat silent except for the creaking of floorboards and the sound of spoons scraping plates at mealtimes where no one spoke. It was on a scorching afternoon in late August when Patrick rode into Columbia to pick up supplies that he first saw Adelaide Owens. She was standing outside the general store, her traveling bag at her feet, studying a notice posted on the board advertising for a school teacher. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she wore a simple gray traveling dress that marked her as neither wealthy nor destitute. What caught his attention was the way she tilted her head while reading, as if she were listening to something beyond the words, and when she turned to glance at the dusty street, her green eyes held a clarity that made him look away quickly. He loaded his wagon with flour, sugar, coffee, and the other necessities that kept a household running, trying not to think about how Sarah had always made this trip an adventure, how she had known everyone's names and stories. The storekeeper, Albert Chin, cleared his throat several times before Patrick realized the man was speaking to him. "I said that's the new school teacher," Albert repeated, gesturing toward the window where Adelaide could be seen negotiating with the proprietor of the boarding house. "Adelaide Owens from Sacramento. Heard her last position ended because the school closed down. Not enough children. She's got fine recommendations, though. Reverend Matthews vouched for her himself." Patrick grunted and counted out his money, not caring about the new school teacher. Emma and Lucy had not attended school since Sarah's death. He had told himself it was because they needed time, but the truth was he could not bear to see them leave each morning, could not stand the thought of the house being even emptier than it already was. "Your girls will be starting up again, I expect," Albert continued, refusing to accept Patrick's silence as dismissal. "Emma's a bright one, and Lucy too. Sarah would have wanted them in school." The mention of his wife's name felt like a punch to the gut, and Patrick grabbed his purchases and walked out without another word. But as he climbed onto the wagon seat, he could not help glancing back at the boarding house where Adelaide Owens was disappearing through the door, her posture straight and determined despite the weariness that must have come from long travel. That night, Emma approached him while he sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the valley. She twisted her hands in her apron, a habit she had developed since her mother's death, and finally spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Papa, there's a new teacher in town. Mrs. Henderson told me when I was at the well. She said school starts next week." Patrick stared at the horizon, at the way the light turned the hills gold and red. "You want to go?" "I don't know," Emma admitted, and he could hear the tears in her voice, even if he could not bring himself to look at her. Lucy has bad dreams every night. I'm afraid to leave her. I'm afraid to leave you. I'm fine, he said automatically, the lie bitter on his tongue. You're not, Emma said with a courage that reminded him painfully of Sarah. None of us are. Mama wouldn't want us to be like this. He had no answer for that, so he said nothing, and after a long moment, Emma went back inside. Patrick sat there until full dark, the guilt eating at him like acid. His daughter was 10 years old and already carrying the weight of the household, trying to be both mother and child, and he was letting her because he did not know how to be what they needed. The first day of school arrived on a Monday morning that dawned clear and hot. Patrick heard Emma moving around the kitchen before sunrise, heard her coaxing Lucy to get dressed, heard the soft sounds of breakfast being prepared. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, willing himself to get up and help them, to say something encouraging, but the weight on his chest held him down. Finally, he rose and dressed and went downstairs to find both girls sitting at the table in their school dresses, their hair braided neatly, their lunch pails packed. They looked at him with identical expressions of hope and fear, and he realized they were waiting for him to tell them it was all right to go, that he would be there when they came home, that the world would not end if they spent a few hours away from the ranch. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence stretched until Emma stood up, took Lucy's hand, and led her sister toward the door. We'll be home by 4, Emma said, her voice steady even as her eyes glistened. I left you a plate in the oven. Then they were gone, two small figures walking down the long drive toward the road that led to town, and Patrick stood at the window watching until they disappeared from sight. The house felt enormous and empty, and he found himself walking from room to room like a man searching for something he had lost but could not name. He ended up in the bedroom he had shared with Sarah, sitting on the edge of the bed they had bought when they first married 15 years ago, remembering how she had laughed when he carried her over the threshold of this house he had built with his own hands. The days fell into a new pattern. The girls would leave for school, and Patrick would work until his body ached, then sit on the porch waiting for them to return. They always came back together, Emma holding Lucy's hand, both of them dusty from the walk. Sometimes they would tell him about their lessons, about the new teacher who had a gentle voice and knew poetry by heart, but mostly they were quiet. He could see them watching him, waiting for him to be the father they remembered, but that man seemed as lost as Sarah was. It was on a Friday afternoon in mid-September when Adelaide Owens appeared at his ranch. Patrick was working on replacing boards in the fence near the house when he heard a horse approaching and looked up to see a woman in a practical riding dress sitting astride a bay mare with the confidence of someone who had grown up around horses. He recognized her immediately, though they had never been formally introduced, and something in his chest tightened at the thought of having to make conversation. Adelaide dismounted gracefully and tied her horse to the rail before approaching him. Up close, he could see that she was probably in her late 20s, with a sprinkling of freckles across her nose and calluses on her hands that spoke of a life that had not always been easy. Her green eyes met his directly, without the pity he had come to dread from others. Mr. Ingram, she said with a slight nod. I'm Adelaide Owens, your daughter's teacher. I hope you don't mind me calling on you like this, but I wanted to discuss Emma and Lucy. Patrick set down his hammer, wiping his hands on his pants. They causing trouble? No, not at all, Adelaide said quickly. They're both excellent students, bright and attentive, but I'm concerned about them. They seem fine to me, Patrick said, defensive walls going up immediately. Adelaide was quiet for a moment, studying him with those clear eyes. Do they? Emma falls asleep at her desk most afternoons, and when I asked her about it, she admitted she's been getting up several times each night with Lucy's nightmares. Lucy barely speaks to the other children and startles at any loud noise, and both of them watch the door constantly, as if they're afraid of what might happen while they're away from home. Patrick felt his jaw tighten. Their mother died 3 months ago. It's natural they're struggling. Of course it is, Adelaide agreed, her voice gentle but firm. Grief is natural, but grief doesn't have to mean suffering alone, Mr. Ingram. Those girls need someone to tell them it's all right to be sad, that crying doesn't make them weak, that their mother's death wasn't somehow their fault for not being good enough or quiet enough or perfect enough. They don't think that, Patrick said, but his voice lacked conviction. Don't they? Adelaide met his eyes. Emma told me yesterday that if she had been more helpful, maybe her mother wouldn't have gotten so tired and sick. Lucy draws pictures of herself as invisible, disappearing from the page. Children blame themselves for things they cannot control, especially when the adults around them shut down. The words hit Patrick like physical blows, each one finding its mark. He wanted to argue, to tell this stranger she had no right to come to his home and judge him, but he could not because he knew she was right. He had been so consumed by his own grief that he had not seen what it was doing to his daughters. I don't know how to help them, he said finally, the admission costing him. I don't know how to help myself. Adelaide's expression softened. May I sit down, Mr. Ingram? He gestured to the porch steps, and they both sat, leaving a respectable distance between them. The afternoon sun slanted across the yard, and in the distance Patrick could hear cattle lowing and birds calling. Normal sounds of a working ranch, a life that continued whether he wanted it to or not. When I was 12, my mother died, giving birth to my baby brother, Adelaide began, her voice steady, but carrying an undercurrent of old pain. My father was a good man, but he disappeared into his work, leaving me to care for my 3 younger siblings. I thought that was what being strong meant. Never crying, never complaining, just pushing through. It wasn't until years later that I realized I had been teaching my brothers and sister that grief was something to be ashamed of, that feelings were weakness. Patrick turned to look at her, seeing the lines around her eyes that spoke of experience, the set of her shoulders that came from carrying burdens. What changed? My grandmother came to stay with us. She took one look at our house, at the way we all moved around each other like strangers, and she sat us all down at the kitchen table. She made us talk about my mother, about the things we missed, the things we wished we had said. We cried together, all of us, even my father, and slowly we started healing. I can't talk about Sarah, Patrick said, his throat tight. Every time I try, the words get stuck. Then don't use words, Adelaide suggested. Look at Emma and Lucy when they talk to you. Hold them when they cry. Let them see that you're sad too, that it's all right to not be fine. Children need to know that emotions are normal, that they're not alone in what they're feeling. Patrick rubbed his face with both hands, exhaustion crashing over him. I'm failing them. I know I am. I just don't know how to be different. You don't have to be different all at once, Adelaide said gently. Start small. Tonight, when they come home, ask them about their day, and really listen to the answers. When Lucy has a nightmare, go to her. It doesn't matter if you don't know the right words. Just be there. They sat in silence for a while, and Patrick felt something shift inside him, as if Adelaide's words had cracked open the ice that had formed around his heart. It was not much, just a hairline fracture, but it was something. Why do you care? He asked finally. You've known my girls for 2 weeks. Adelaide smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to beautiful. Because I've taught a lot of children, Mr. Ingram, and I've learned that the ones who suffer in silence are the ones who need help the most. Emma and Lucy are special. They're kind and smart and resilient, but they're also drowning, and they need their father to throw them a line. Patrick nodded slowly. Will you come back? To check on them, I mean. To make sure I'm doing it right. If you'd like me to, Adelaide said. But I think you'll do better than you expect. The fact that you're willing to try already puts you ahead of many. She stood then, brushing dust from her skirt, and Patrick rose with her. As she mounted her horse, she looked back at him with an expression he could not quite read. Your girls talk about you constantly, you know, about how strong you are, how hard you work, how much you loved their mother. They want you back, Mr. Ingram. They're just afraid to ask for what they need because they think it will burden you. With that, she rode away, leaving Patrick standing in his yard with his thoughts in turmoil. He looked toward the road where Emma and Lucy would appear soon, walking home from school, and for the first time in months, he felt something other than emptiness. It was small and fragile, but it might have been hope. When his daughters came into view an hour later, Patrick was sitting on the porch waiting for them. As they approached, he could see the wariness in their expressions, the way they braced themselves for his usual distant greeting. Instead, he stood and walked down the steps to meet them. "How was school?" he asked, and he made himself look at their faces. Really look, seeing the shadows under Emma's eyes and the sadness in Lucy's expression. Emma blinked in surprise. "It was good, Papa. Miss Owens taught us about California history, about the gold rush and how Columbia used to be one of the biggest mining towns in the state. And we had reading time," Lucy added softly, her voice so quiet he had to lean down to hear her. "Miss Owens read us a story about a girl who could talk to horses." "That sounds nice," Patrick said, and he realized he meant it. "I'm sorry I haven't asked before. I'm sorry I haven't been there for you the way I should be." Emma's eyes filled with tears, and Lucy's lip trembled. Patrick opened his arms, awkward and uncertain, and both girls crashed into him, holding on as if they might never let go. They stood there in the dusty yard, the three of them wrapped together, and Patrick felt the ice around his heart crack a little wider. That night, when Lucy woke screaming from a nightmare about her mother disappearing into darkness, Patrick was the one who went to her room. He sat on the edge of her bed and pulled her into his arms, rocking her the way Sarah used to do. "It's all right to be scared," he whispered into her hair. "I'm scared too, but we're going to be all right. I promise I'm going to do better." Lucy clung to him, her small body shaking with sobs, and Emma appeared in the doorway, her own tears streaming down her face. Patrick held out one arm and she ran to him, and they sat there together in the lamplight, crying for the woman they had lost and the time they could not get back. The weeks that followed were not easy, but they were different. Patrick made himself present in ways he had not been since Sarah's death. He asked questions at dinner and listened to the answers. He helped with homework, even though his own education had been limited. He read to Lucy at bedtime from the books Sarah had treasured, stumbling over unfamiliar words, but trying. And slowly, carefully, he started talking about Sarah, sharing memories that made them laugh and cry in equal measure. Adelaide continued to visit the ranch, usually on Saturday afternoons when school was not in session. She would bring books for the girls or help Emma with a difficult math problem. But mostly she talked with Patrick, helping him navigate the complicated waters of parenthood and grief. He found himself looking forward to her visits, to the way she never treated him like he was broken, only like he was learning. One Saturday in October, Adelaide arrived to find Patrick and the girls attempting to bake bread with disastrous results. Flour covered every surface, and the dough looked more like paste than anything edible. Lucy was giggling for the first time in months, and Emma was trying to salvage the situation with a cookbook propped open on the counter. "Well," Adelaide said from the doorway, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "This looks like quite the operation." Patrick turned, suddenly aware of how ridiculous he must look with flour in his hair and dough on his hands. "Sarah always made it seem easy. I'm starting to think it was magic." "Not magic," Adelaide said, rolling up her sleeves. "Just practice and patience. Let me help." She stepped into the kitchen and took charge with the same quiet competence she brought to everything. She showed Emma how to knead the dough properly, explaining that bread needed to be worked, but not overworked. She let Lucy measure out ingredients, praising her careful counting. And she stood beside Patrick at the counter, their shoulders nearly touching, guiding his hands through the motions until he started to get the feel of it. "You're a natural," she said with a smile. And Patrick felt his face heat in a way that had nothing to do with the warm kitchen. "I'm covered in flour," he pointed out. "So am I," Adelaide replied, and he realized it was true, white powder dusting her nose and streaking her dark green dress. She looked nothing like Sarah, who had been blonde and petite and always perfectly put together, but standing there in his chaotic kitchen, Adelaide looked like she belonged. The bread turned out reasonably well, and they ate it warm with butter while it was still steaming. The girls chattered happily about their week, and Patrick found himself watching Adelaide, noticing little things, the way she listened to Lucy with complete attention, never dismissing the girl's quiet observations, the way she challenged Emma's sharp mind with questions that made her think, the way she had flour in her hair and did not seem to care. After dinner, while the girls were outside playing in the last light of day, Patrick walked Adelaide to her horse. The evening air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of late-blooming wildflowers and distant pine. "Thank you," Patrick said, "for everything. The girls are doing better. I'm doing better." Adelaide secured her saddlebag and turned to face him. "You're doing the work, Patrick. I'm just offering suggestions." It was the first time she had used his given name, and he realized with a start that he had been thinking of her as Adelaide for weeks now, not Miss Owens. The formality between them had eroded so gradually he had not noticed it happening. "Still," he said, "I don't know what we would have done without you." "You would have figured it out," she said with confidence. "You love your daughters. That's the foundation everything else is built on." Patrick wanted to say something more, something about how her visits had become the highlight of his week, how he found himself thinking about her at odd moments, wondering what she would say about a situation or how she would solve a problem. But the words felt too big and too soon, so he simply helped her mount her horse and watched her ride away into the gathering darkness. November brought cooler weather and shorter days. The girls were thriving in school, and Patrick could see the difference in them. Emma had started smiling again, her natural curiosity returning as she threw herself into her studies. Lucy was coming out of her shell, making friends with the other children, and bringing home drawings that were filled with color instead of shadows. The ranch was running smoothly again, the hands no longer tiptoeing around Patrick like he might shatter. Adelaide's visits became more frequent, and Patrick started finding excuses to ride into town during the week. He would time his errands to coincide with the end of the school day, arriving just as the children were spilling out of the schoolhouse. He told himself it was to check on his daughters, to make sure they were all right, but he knew the truth was more complicated. He was falling in love with Adelaide Owens, and it terrified him. It felt like a betrayal of Sarah, like he was replacing her memory with someone new. But at night, lying alone in his bed, he could almost hear Sarah's voice telling him not to be foolish, that she would never want him to spend the rest of his life alone, that the girls needed a mother and he needed a partner. Still, he held back, afraid of what it would mean to open his heart again, afraid of the pain that could come if he lost another person he loved. It was Emma who finally forced the issue. She had grown observant in the months since her mother's death, paying attention to things that most children would miss. One evening in late November, after Lucy had gone to bed, she sat down beside Patrick on the porch and looked at him seriously. "Papa, do you like Miss Owens?" Patrick nearly dropped his coffee cup. "What kind of question is that?" "The kind that needs an answer," Emma said with a maturity beyond her years. "You smile when she comes to visit. You ride into town more often than you need to. And you get quiet whenever anyone mentions her name." "She's your teacher," Patrick said weakly. "She's also kind and smart and makes you happy," Emma countered. "Mama wouldn't want you to be alone forever, Papa. She told me that once before she got really sick. She said that if anything ever happened to her, she wanted you to find someone who would love you and take care of you." Patrick felt tears sting his eyes. "She said that?" Emma nodded. "She loved you so much, and she would love Miss Owens for helping us when we needed it most. We all would. It's complicated, Emma. I don't even know if Adelaide feels the same way." "Then you should find out," Emma said simply. "Life's too short to be afraid, Papa. You taught me that." Patrick pulled his daughter close, marveling at her wisdom and courage. She was right, of course. Sarah would not have wanted him to close himself off from love, to spend the rest of his life as a ghost moving through the world. And Adelaide had brought light back into their home, had shown him how to heal and helped him become a better father. The question was whether she saw him as anything more than a project, a broken man she had helped to fix. The opportunity to find out came sooner than expected. The town was planning a harvest dance in early December, a tradition that brought the community together before the hardest part of winter set in. Patrick had not attended social events since Sarah's death, but Emma and Lucy were excited about going, and he found himself thinking about Adelaide in a dress meant for dancing instead of her practical day wear. On the afternoon before the dance, Patrick rode into town with a bouquet of late-season roses from Sarah's garden. His hands were sweating despite the cool air, and he felt like a fool, a grown man of 35 acting like a nervous boy. He tied his horse outside the schoolhouse, just as Adelaide was locking up for the day. She turned and saw him, surprise flickering across her face. "Patrick, is everything all right? The girls?" "They're fine," he said quickly. "I wanted to talk to you, if you have a minute." "Of course." Adelaide set down her bag, her green eyes curious. Patrick cleared his throat, feeling his courage waver. "I wanted to ask if you would accompany me to the harvest dance tomorrow. Not as the girls' teacher, but as my guest." He held out the roses, and Adelaide took them slowly, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched, and Patrick felt his heart sinking. He had misread the situation, mistaken her kindness for something more, and now he had made everything awkward. Then Adelaide smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I would love to, Patrick. I was planning to attend alone, but this is much better." Relief flooded through him. "Really? Really?" she confirmed, bringing the roses to her nose and inhaling their faint scent. "I've been hoping you would ask, actually, but I didn't want to presume anything." "You've been hoping?" Patrick could not quite believe it. Adelaide's cheeks flushed pink. "I know it might seem too soon, or inappropriate given how we met, but I've come to care about you, Patrick. You're a good man, a good father, and you've worked so hard to heal yourself and your daughters. How could I not admire that?" Patrick stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "I care about you too, Adelaide. More than I thought I could care about anyone after Sarah. It scares me, but Emma reminded me that life's too short to be afraid." "Emma is a wise girl," Adelaide said softly. "And for what it's worth, I don't think loving again means forgetting what you had before. The heart is big enough to hold both grief and joy, both memory and hope." Patrick reached out and gently touched her cheek, and Adelaide leaned into his hand. Standing there on the dusty street outside the schoolhouse, with the November sun slanting through the trees, Patrick felt something unlock inside him. It was not that the grief disappeared, or that he stopped missing Sarah, but for the first time since her death, he felt like the future held something other than empty days and hollow nights. The harvest dance was held in the town hall, which had been decorated with corn stalks, pumpkins, and strings of colored paper. The whole community turned out, ranchers and merchants, miners and their families, everyone dressed in their best clothes and ready to celebrate another year survived. Patrick arrived with Emma and Lucy, both girls wearing new dresses that Adelaide had helped them pick out, their hair braided with ribbons. When Adelaide entered the hall, Patrick's breath caught. She wore a dress of deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and her auburn hair was loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual practical bun. She looked beautiful and a little nervous, and Patrick felt a surge of affection for this woman who had given his family so much. He crossed the room to her, aware of the eyes tracking his movement, the whispers that would follow. Columbia was a small town, and everyone had opinions about how long a man should mourn before moving on. But as he took Adelaide's hand and led her onto the dance floor, Patrick found he did not care what anyone thought. This was his life, his choice, and Sarah would have understood. The music started, a lively fiddle tune, and Patrick pulled Adelaide into a waltz. He was not a graceful dancer, his rancher's body more accustomed to hard labor than ballroom steps, but Adelaide followed his lead with easy grace. They moved together around the floor, and Patrick felt the last of his hesitation melt away. "You look beautiful," he said, loud enough to be heard over the music, but soft enough to be private. Adelaide smiled up at him. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Mr. Ingram." "Patrick," he corrected. "Please." "Patrick," she repeated, and he loved the sound of his name on her lips. They danced 3 dances in a row before Emma and Lucy appeared, tugging on Adelaide's skirt and begging her to dance with them. Adelaide laughed and let herself be pulled away, leaving Patrick to watch from the sidelines as she spun his daughters around the floor with patient joy. He saw the way Emma's face glowed with happiness, the way Lucy giggled freely, and he knew that Adelaide had already become essential to all of them. Reverend Matthews appeared beside Patrick, a cup of punch in each hand. He offered one to Patrick with a knowing smile. "She's a good woman, Patrick. Your Sarah would approve." Patrick took the punch and nodded. "I think she would. The girls seem happy," the Reverend observed. "Happier than they've been in months." "They are, we all are, thanks to Adelaide." "Not just thanks to her," the Reverend said gently. "You did the hard work, Patrick. You let yourself be helped. And you changed. That took courage." Patrick watched Adelaide twirl Lucy until the little girl was breathless with laughter. "I didn't have much choice. I was drowning, and she threw me a rope. But you grabbed on," the Reverend pointed out. "Not everyone does." As the evening wore on, Patrick found himself dancing with Adelaide again, this time to a slower song that allowed them to talk while they moved. "Your daughters told me they approve," Adelaide said with a teasing smile. "Emma gave me quite the interrogation earlier about my intentions toward their father." Patrick groaned. "I'm sorry. She can be protective." "Don't be sorry. It's sweet. They love you very much, and they want you to be happy." "I am happy," Patrick said, surprised to realize it was true. "For the first time in months, I'm actually happy. Because of you." Adelaide's expression grew serious. "I need you to understand something, Patrick. I'm not trying to replace your wife. I could never do that, and I wouldn't want to. But I would like to be part of your life if you'll have me. Part of all your lives." "I want that," Patrick said firmly. "The girls want that. We've all talked about it, actually. About how you've become family." "Family," Adelaide repeated, her eyes glistening. "I lost most of mine years ago. The idea of having a new one, a chosen one, means more than you know." Patrick pulled her closer, closer than was strictly proper, and Adelaide rested her head against his shoulder. They moved together in silence, and Patrick felt a peace he had not known since Sarah's death. The guilt was still there, a quiet ache that would probably never fully disappear, but it no longer consumed him. He could honor Sarah's memory and still move forward. He could grieve what he had lost and still embrace what he had found. The dance ended near midnight, and Patrick walked Adelaide back to the boarding house where she kept a room. The streets were quiet, lit by oil lamps and a half-moon overhead. At her door, Adelaide turned to face him, and Patrick found himself memorizing her features in the soft light. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "It was perfect." "Thank you for saying yes," Patrick replied. "And for everything else. For seeing what we needed and having the courage to help." Adelaide reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his weathered skin. "You're a good man, Patrick Ingram. I'm glad I took this teaching position. I'm glad I met you and your girls." Patrick covered her hand with his own. Then slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative, a question as much as a statement, and when Adelaide kissed him back, her other hand coming up to curl in his hair, Patrick felt something fundamental shift inside him. This was not betrayal. This was life continuing, love growing in new directions, healing that honored the past while embracing the future. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Adelaide smiled, her cheeks flushed, and Patrick could not resist kissing her again, quick and sweet. "Good night, Adelaide," he said softly. "Good night, Patrick," she replied. "I'll see you tomorrow?" "Tomorrow and every day after, if you'll let me." "I'll let you," Adelaide promised. Patrick walked back through the quiet streets to where he had left his wagon with Emma and Lucy, already asleep in the back, curled together under a blanket. As he drove home under the stars, he thought about how far they had all come in just a few months. They were not the same people they had been when Sarah died. The grief had changed them, marked them, but they had survived it together. And now, with Adelaide's help, they were learning to be whole again. Winter settled over Columbia, with cold rains and the occasional dusting of snow on the higher elevations. Patrick continued his work on the ranch, but now Adelaide was a regular presence in his life. She would ride out on Sundays after church, staying for dinner and often remaining into the evening, helping the girls with their studies or reading aloud while they all sat around the fire. Patrick found himself counting the days between her visits, found himself making excuses to ride into town just to see her for a few minutes during her lunch break. The whole town was watching their courtship, of course, and opinions were divided. Some people thought it was too soon after Sarah's death, disrespectful to her memory. Others were happy for Patrick, glad to see him smiling again, to see his daughters thriving. Patrick tried not to listen to the gossip, but it was Adelaide who finally addressed it head on. It was a cold January afternoon, and they were sitting on the porch wrapped in blankets while the girls played in the barn. Adelaide had been quiet all day, and Patrick could tell something was troubling her. "What's wrong?" he finally asked. Adelaide was silent for a moment, then sighed. "I heard some of the women talking at the mercantile yesterday, about how I'm a homewrecker, about how I'm taking advantage of a grieving widower and his vulnerable daughters." Patrick felt anger surge through him. "That's ridiculous. You've done nothing but help us. I know that, and you know that, but they don't see it that way. They see a woman who moved to town and immediately set her sights on an eligible widower." "Let them think what they want," Patrick said firmly. "I don't care about their opinions." "But I do," Adelaide admitted. "Not because I think they're right, but because I don't want to cause problems for you or the girls. Emma and Lucy have to live in this town, go to school here. If people think poorly of me, it could affect them." Patrick took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "The people whose opinions matter know the truth. Reverend Matthews supports us. Albert Chen told me just last week that he's never seen the girls look so happy. And Emma and Lucy adore you. That's what matters, Adelaide. Not the gossip of bored people who have nothing better to do." "You're sure?" Adelaide asked, her green eyes searching his face. "I've never been more sure of anything," Patrick said. "I love you, Adelaide. I should have said it before now, but I was scared. Scared that it was too soon. Scared that I was betraying Sarah's memory. Scared that I would lose you like I lost her. But Emma was right. Life's too short to be afraid. I love you, and I want a future with you." Adelaide's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you too, Patrick. I have for weeks now. I was just waiting for you to be ready." Patrick pulled her close, kissing her deeply, not caring if anyone saw. When they finally broke apart, Adelaide was laughing and crying at the same time. "Does this mean you're going to marry me?" Patrick asked, feeling bold. "Is that a proposal?" Adelaide teased. "It's a terrible proposal," Patrick admitted. "You deserve better. Flowers and poetry and something romantic. But I'm not good at those things, Adelaide. I'm just a rancher who's trying his best to be a good father and a good man. But I would spend every day for the rest of my life trying to make you happy if you'll let me." Adelaide cupped his face in both hands. "That's the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. Yes, Patrick Ingram, I will marry you." They told Emma and Lucy that night over dinner, and the girls' reactions were everything Patrick could have hoped for. Emma burst into tears and threw her arms around Adelaide, thanking her for loving them and making their father smile again. Lucy climbed into Adelaide's lap and asked if she could call her mama, and Adelaide cried and said yes, if that was what Lucy wanted. It was not replacing Sarah, Patrick realized as he watched his daughters embrace the woman he loved. It was allowing their family to grow and change, to adapt to new circumstances while honoring what had come before. Emma and Lucy would always remember their birth mother, would always carry her in their hearts, but they had room for Adelaide too. Children were resilient like that, able to love deeply and multiply their affections rather than divide them. They were married in February of 1879 in the small church where Patrick and Sarah had been married 16 years earlier. It was a simple ceremony, attended by close friends and family, with Emma and Lucy standing up beside them as witnesses. Adelaide wore a cream-colored dress that she had sewn herself, and Patrick wore his best suit, his hair slicked back and his face freshly shaved. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Patrick kissed his new bride with all the love and gratitude he felt, and the small congregation erupted in applause. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the barn and food provided by the neighbors who supported their union. There was music and dancing and toasts to the happy couple. Emma gave a short speech about how Adelaide had saved their family, her voice strong and clear, and there was not a dry eye in the barn. Lucy presented Adelaide with a drawing she had made, showing the four of them holding hands in front of the ranch house, and Adelaide promised to frame it and hang it in a place of honor. As the party wound down and guests started heading home, Patrick stood with Adelaide watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. His daughters were playing with some of the other children, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze, and Adelaide was warm and solid beside him, her hand clasped in his. "Happy?" she asked softly. "More than I ever thought I could be again," Patrick admitted. "You've given me so much, Adelaide. You've given all of us so much." "You gave me a family," Adelaide replied. "A home, a purpose beyond just teaching. I never thought I would have this, Patrick. I had resigned myself to a life alone. And then I came to Columbia and met 3 people who needed exactly what I had to give." "We did need you," Patrick agreed. "But it's more than that now. I want you. I choose you. Not because you fixed what was broken, but because of who you are. Because you're brave and kind and patient and strong. Because you make me laugh and challenge me to be better. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Adelaide turned to face him fully, going up on her toes to kiss him. "Then it's a good thing you won't have to." That night, after the last guest had departed and the girls were asleep in their rooms, Patrick and Adelaide finally had their wedding night. Patrick was nervous, afraid that being with someone other than Sarah would feel wrong, but as Adelaide stood before him in the lamplight, her hair loose and her eyes full of love, all his doubts melted away. She was not Sarah and never would be, but she was Adelaide, and she was his wife, and that was exactly right. They loved each other slowly and gently, learning each other's bodies and preferences, whispering promises and endearments in the darkness. Afterward, lying tangled together in the bed that had once belonged to him and Sarah alone, Patrick felt at peace. Sarah would always be his first love, the mother of his children, an irreplaceable part of his history. But Adelaide was his present and his future, the woman who had taught him how to heal and shown him that the heart could hold infinite love without diminishing what had come before. The months that followed were the happiest Patrick could remember. Adelaide moved into the ranch house, bringing her books and her cheerful presence to every corner. She took over the household management, freeing Patrick to focus on the ranch work, and she did it with a combination of efficiency and warmth that made the house feel like a home again. She taught Emma and Lucy to cook and sew, but she also encouraged their education, filling their minds with literature and history and mathematics. She created a life for them that was both structured and joyful, and Patrick fell more in love with her every day. Emma and Lucy bloomed under Adelaide's care. Emma grew into a confident, curious girl who talked about becoming a teacher like her stepmother. Lucy's nightmares became less frequent, and her natural shyness gave way to a quiet confidence. They still talked about Sarah, still remembered her with love and sadness, but the grief no longer defined them. They had learned that it was possible to miss someone and still be happy, to honor a memory while making new ones. In the spring of 1880, Adelaide told Patrick she was pregnant. He was terrified and overjoyed in equal measure, memories of Sarah's difficult pregnancies and ultimate death making his hands shake as he pulled his wife close. But Adelaide was healthy and strong, and the town's doctor assured them that there was no reason to expect complications. Patrick tried to believe him, tried not to imagine the worst, but he could not help hovering, treating Adelaide like she was made of glass. It was Adelaide who finally called him on it, sitting him down one evening after the girls had gone to bed and taking both his hands in hers. Patrick, you have to stop worrying like this. I'm not Sarah. Every pregnancy is different. Every woman is different. You can't protect me from life by wrapping me in cotton wool. I can't lose you, Patrick said, his voice raw. I barely survived losing Sarah. If something happened to you and the baby, I don't think I could come back from that. Nothing is going to happen, Adelaide said firmly. I'm healthy, the baby is growing well, and I have excellent care. But even if something did go wrong, which it won't, you would survive it, because you're stronger than you think, and because Emma and Lucy need you. You've already proven you can weather the worst life has to offer. Only because you helped me, Patrick pointed out. And if you needed help again, people would be there, Adelaide said. That's what you've learned, Patrick, that you don't have to carry everything alone, that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Patrick pulled her into his arms, resting his hand on the small swell of her belly, where their child grew. I'm going to worry anyway, but I'll try not to smother you. Adelaide laughed. That's all I ask. Their son was born in November of 1880, arriving after a labor that was long but uncomplicated. Patrick held Adelaide's hand through all of it, marveling at her strength, his heart in his throat until he heard the baby's first cry. When the midwife placed the squirming, red-faced infant in his arms, Patrick wept openly, overwhelmed by love and relief and gratitude. They named him Samuel, after Adelaide's father, and he was perfect. Emma and Lucy were immediately smitten with their baby brother, competing to hold him and help with his care. The house that had been so silent and sorrowful 2 years earlier now rang with baby cries and children's laughter, and Patrick could hardly remember what his life had been like before Adelaide. As the years passed, the Ingram family grew and thrived. Adelaide had 2 more children, a daughter named Rose in 1882 and another son named Thomas in 1884. Emma grew up and became a teacher, taking over the schoolhouse when Adelaide retired to focus on her growing family. Lucy developed a talent for art, selling her paintings to tourists who visited Colombia looking for relics of the gold rush days. The ranch prospered under Patrick's careful management, and he took on additional land, building the operation into something that would provide for his children and grandchildren. But the core of it all, the foundation on which everything else was built, was the love between Patrick and Adelaide. They had come together in grief and found healing. They had learned that families could grow and change, that love did not diminish through multiplication, but expanded to encompass whoever needed it. They had shown Emma and Lucy that it was possible to honor the past while embracing the future, that hearts were big enough to hold both sorrow and joy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Patrick and Adelaide stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the valley, just as they had done countless times before. Emma was visiting with her husband and baby daughter. Lucy was inside painting. Samuel, Rose, and Thomas were playing in the yard, their voices carrying in the evening air. Did you ever imagine this? Adelaide asked, leaning into Patrick's side. When you first saw me outside the general store? Patrick wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. No. Back then I couldn't imagine anything but darkness. I was so lost, Adelaide. If you hadn't come along when you did, I don't know what would have happened to us. You would have found your way eventually, Adelaide said with confidence. You're stronger than you ever gave yourself credit for. Maybe, Patrick allowed. But it would have taken longer, and we would have suffered more. You gave us the tools we needed to heal. You showed me how to be a father again, how to be present for my girls when they needed me most. And then you gave me so much more. He gestured to the children playing in the yard, to the house full of life and love. You gave me a second chance at happiness. You gave Emma and Lucy a mother who loves them. You gave all of us a future. Adelaide turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. Silver threaded through his dark hair now, and lines marked his eyes and mouth, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they had married. We gave each other a second chance, she corrected. I was alone too, Patrick. I had lost my family and resigned myself to a life dedicated to other people's children. And then I met you, and Emma, and Lucy, and suddenly I had a family of my own. You gave me as much as I gave you. Patrick kissed her softly, lovingly, the familiar touch still sending warmth through his entire body even after a decade of marriage. Then I guess we were lucky. Not lucky, Adelaide disagreed. Brave. We were brave enough to risk loving again after loss, brave enough to let ourselves heal, brave enough to build something new while honoring what came before. She was right, Patrick knew. It had taken courage to let Adelaide into his life, to let her into his daughters' lives, to risk his heart again after it had been so thoroughly broken, but it had been worth it. Every moment of fear, every struggle, every tear had been worth it for this, for the family they had built together, for the love they shared. As darkness fell and Adelaide called the children inside for dinner, Patrick stood on the porch for one more moment, looking up at the stars beginning to appear overhead. He thought of Sarah, as he still did most days, and sent her a silent thank you. Thank you for the years they had shared, for the daughters she had given him, for loving him enough to want him to find happiness after she was gone. He knew with a certainty that went beyond faith or hope that wherever she was, she approved of Adelaide, of the family they had made, of the life they had built. Then he went inside, to the warmth and noise and love that filled every corner of his home, and closed the door behind him. The grief would always be part of him, a scar on his heart that would never fully fade. But it did not define him anymore. He was Patrick Ingram, husband to Adelaide, father to 6, rancher and friend and community member. He had known terrible loss and found a way through it. He had learned that healing was possible, that hearts could break and mend and be made stronger in the breaking. The dinner table was chaotic, with 6 children ranging from infant Thomas to adult Emma, all competing for attention and passing dishes and telling stories. Adelaide sat at one end, her face glowing with happiness as she managed the controlled chaos with practiced ease. Patrick sat at the other end, looking around at the faces of his family, these people he loved more than life itself, and he felt gratitude wash over him. This was what healing looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of love strong enough to coexist with it. Not forgetting what had been lost, but building something new from the ruins. Not replacing what was gone, but making room in the heart for what could be. After dinner, Patrick helped Adelaide bathe the younger children while Emma and Lucy cleaned up the kitchen. It was a nightly routine, comfortable and familiar, and Patrick had learned to treasure these small domestic moments. He had missed so many of them in those dark months after Sarah's death, had been so lost in his own grief that he had failed to see his daughters drowning in theirs. But Adelaide had pulled them all back from the edge, had shown him that being strong did not mean suffering alone, that asking for help was not weakness but wisdom. When the children were finally asleep, Patrick and Adelaide retreated to their bedroom. Adelaide sat at her dressing table, brushing out her long hair, and Patrick watched her from the bed with the same sense of wonder he had felt on their wedding night. She had changed his life in ways he could never fully express, had taken a broken family and helped them become whole again. "What are you thinking?" Adelaide asked, catching his eye in the mirror. "That I love you," Patrick said simply. "That I'm grateful for every day we have together. That you're the best thing that ever happened to me and the girls." Adelaide set down her brush and came to the bed, crawling under the covers beside him. Patrick pulled her close, and she rested her head on his chest, her hand over his heart. I love you too, she whispered. Thank you for letting me in. Thank you for being brave enough to love again. Thank you for being patient enough to wait for me to be ready, Patrick replied, and for showing me how to be the father my girls needed. They lay there in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the house settling around them. This was home, Patrick thought, not just the building, but the people in it, the love that bound them together. He had built this house with his own hands when he married Sarah, had intended it to be their forever home. And in a way, it still was, just with a different configuration. Sarah's memory lived here, in the stories they told, and the traditions they kept, but Adelaide's presence had made it warm and welcoming again. In the years that followed, as their children grew and had children of their own, Patrick and Adelaide became the heart of their family. They were the ones everyone turned to for advice, for comfort, for celebration. They taught their children and grandchildren about resilience and love, about honoring the past while embracing the future. They told stories about Sarah, keeping her memory alive for the younger generation, but they also created new stories, new traditions, building a legacy that incorporated grief and joy in equal measure. Emma married a schoolteacher from a neighboring town and had 4 children of her own. She often told her students about how her stepmother had saved her family, how Adelaide had shown her that teachers could change lives. Lucy married later to an artist who appreciated her quiet nature and remarkable talent. They moved to San Francisco but returned to Colombia every summer, bringing their 3 children to visit the ranch where Lucy had grown up. Samuel grew up to take over the ranch, working alongside Patrick until age and injury made the physical labor too difficult. Rose became a nurse, dedicating her life to helping others heal, and Thomas followed in Emma's footsteps, becoming a teacher in Sacramento. All of them carried the lessons Patrick and Adelaide had taught them about family and resilience, about the importance of asking for help and the courage it took to be vulnerable. As Patrick aged, he often reflected on the journey that had brought him to this place. The young man who had lost his first wife to cholera seemed like a different person now, someone Patrick could barely remember being. The grief had changed him, marked him indelibly, but Adelaide had helped him transform that grief into something bearable, something that could coexist with happiness rather than consuming it entirely. On a warm spring day in 1905, Patrick and Adelaide celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary with a family gathering at the ranch. 3 generations filled the house and yard, children running and adults talking and food covering every available surface. Patrick was 70 now, his body worn down by decades of hard labor, but his mind was sharp and his heart was full. As the party wound down and people started heading home, Emma approached her father on the porch where he sat watching the sunset. She was 45 now, her hair showing silver, her own children nearly grown. But when she looked at Patrick, she still saw the man who had been there for her when she needed him most, who had learned how to comfort his daughters, even when his own heart was breaking. "Papa," she said, sitting beside him, "I wanted to tell you something. I've been working on a project, writing down the family history for the grandchildren. And I realized that the most important story I have to tell is about how you and Adelaide saved each other, how you showed all of us that healing is possible even after terrible loss." Patrick felt tears sting his eyes. "I didn't save anyone, Emma. I was drowning and Adelaide threw me a rope. She's the hero of that story." "No, Papa," Emma said firmly. "You were the one who grabbed the rope. You were the one who chose to heal, to be vulnerable, to love again. Adelaide helped, but you did the hard work. And that's what I want the grandchildren to know, that grief is survivable, that families can overcome tragedy, that love is always worth the risk." Patrick pulled his daughter close, this woman who had been so brave at 10 years old, taking care of her sister while her father fell apart. "You helped save me too. You know, you and Lucy, if it hadn't been for you girls, I might have stayed lost in that grief forever, but I couldn't let you suffer alone. Adelaide showed me how to be there for you, but you were the reason I kept trying. They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Adelaide came out with Lucy, and soon all four of them were on the porch, talking and laughing and remembering. They spoke of Sarah, keeping her memory bright and alive. They spoke of the early days after her death, when everything seemed dark and hopeless. And they spoke of how Adelaide had arrived like an answer to prayers no one had known to say, teaching them all how to heal together. As stars began to appear overhead, Patrick looked at his family and felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to his eyes. He had loved and lost and learned to love again. He had failed and struggled and ultimately succeeded in becoming the father his daughters deserved. He had built a life on the foundation of tragedy and found that healing was not just possible, but inevitable when surrounded by love. Adelaide caught his eye and smiled, and Patrick smiled back, reaching for her hand. After 26 years of marriage, they still communicated in glances and touches, still found joy in each other's presence. She had given him so much, more than he could ever repay, but she always insisted that he had given her just as much, a family, a home, a love that had only grown deeper with time. Patrick lived another 3 years, dying peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73 with Adelaide beside him. His funeral was attended by nearly everyone in Colombia and the surrounding area, testament to the man he had become. Emma delivered the eulogy, speaking of his strength and vulnerability, his capacity for love and growth. She told the story of how he had learned to comfort his daughters after their mother's death, how Adelaide had shown him the way, and they had all healed together. Adelaide lived another 15 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, keeping Patrick's memory alive with the same care she had given to Sarah's. She never remarried, telling anyone who asked that she had been blessed with one great love, and that was enough. She spent her final years writing down the family history, ensuring that future generations would know the story of how grief had brought two people together and how love had transformed them all. The ranch remained in the family for generations, the house Patrick had built with his own hands, sheltering his descendants long after he was gone. And on the hillside, overlooking the valley, 3 graves stood side by side. Sarah, who had been Patrick's first love and the mother of his eldest daughters, Patrick, who had learned that hearts could break and heal and love again, and Adelaide, who had shown a grieving widower how to comfort his girls, and in doing so, had found her own family. Their story became legend in Colombia, a testament to the power of compassion and the resilience of the human heart. People spoke of how Adelaide Owens had come to town as a stranger and transformed a broken family into a thriving one. They spoke of how Patrick Ingram had faced his deepest grief and come out stronger on the other side. But most of all, they spoke of how love could exist in many forms, how families could be rebuilt, how healing was always possible when people were brave enough to reach for it. The widower had not known how to comfort his girls, but she had shown him. And together, in that showing and learning and growing, they had all healed. They had honored the past while building a future. They had proven that the heart was vast enough to hold grief and joy simultaneously, that love did not diminish through loss, but rather expanded to encompass whoever needed it. They had created a legacy that would outlast them all, a story of hope and resilience that would be told for generations. And in the end, that was everything.